I think wisdom, the interpretation of it is going to change. Wisdom is about giving answers, is sharing knowledge. I think what's going to happen is with wisdom is the reinterpretation. It's going to be the kind of questions that we ask from wisdom about the possibilities, what that will open.
Hey, welcome back to the Humble Mind podcast. How often do you think about how quickly things change and how quickly you've got to learn what they are and how to adapt to them and what it all means, all at the same time? It's quite an insane world that we live in, and certainly something that I feel really benefits from conversation with people of like minds, some of which are not the same as you, but they're still like-minded. They still get the vibe. They still want to be part of that conversation. And that's exactly what we did today at the Community Voices Roundtable, featuring some of our Humble Mind members. We jumped into conversation about the kinds of topics, the kinds of challenges and things that we're thinking about, but don't always get the chance to talk about and to talk about with people. And today we spoke about the nature of skills and the nature of whether experts and expertise is changing, and even is it dying, with the real nature of wisdom, being wise, being able to have perspectives on how things change in the world and what we should do about it. Is that changing? Well, we had an amazing conversation. I'm sure you'll enjoy it as much as I did. We talked about the relevance of learning, the speed of learning. We talked about how change affects us in the workplace versus in our personal lives, and what each of the community members got a chance to share and talk about a little bit. And we also, I think, arrived at quite an interesting conclusion at the end, which I think you'll like, which was not really expected from the motion that we set for the discussion. We agreed that the real skill set is not so much about being on the spectrum between being a specialist or being a generalist who can appreciate the wider view, but rather the ability for you as a human, as a person on this planet, to be able to switch between the two when the situation is needed or when the challenge calls for it. And I think that was a bit of wisdom that we all arrived at. But I hope you'll listen to the conversation. It's great. I hope you'll be part of it as well. Check out join.humblemind.co for more on how to do that. Here are the community voices.
The last point you put on the WhatsApp thing was how might not knowing actually be a superpower. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So this is in contrast to ignorance, because ignorance in its pure kind of form, I suppose, goes dangerously close to prejudice and some of the other nasty aspects of human behavior that I don't think anyone wants to get too close to. But at the same time, being creative and curious means that you don't make assumptions. And I think sometimes walking into a situation where you're happy to let go of assumptions and you're happy to start from scratch about something, and sometimes maybe even toss out conventional wisdom, I think can be a real superpower when it comes to trying to solve a problem or trying to think innovatively about a product or trying to find a challenge, in a personal capacity in the workplace, how to deal with the boss perhaps or something like that. So sometimes, coming at it with a blank slate can be good. So I approached it from that angle. Did you have a perspective on that? Did you have something you wanted to share on that?
No, it's something I'm trying to actually do myself anyway, coming without bias, predominantly driven by my kids who keep coming at me without bias, and I'm having to sort of buckle under the questions and where they come from, all those kind of things. And you have to sort of formulate the process in your mind. So it's sort of, just repositioning myself into someone else's shoes is what I've sort of driven from that. And then seeing where they're coming from, all those kind of things.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, let's get in. Yeah, go for it, John.
It's kind of interesting. I was looking at that question. I was trying to think, how would I answer that? And all that kept coming in my mind is that if we've got absolute certainty, we've got absolutely no growth. If we know for certain that they're going to be the events, we're never going to grow. So that uncertainty is actually the superpower in, I think in, where, sort of evolution, creativity, whatever, shows up. So for me, it's one of the big things, really. Uncertainty is just always there. It makes us create solutions. So I was kind of looking at it from that perspective. And that's what I found interesting.
Maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of frame up our conversation a bit so that we can get into it, because I think that we're in the age of uncertainty, for sure. Perhaps you might be able to argue that that's always been the case. There's always been a kind of an uncertain present moment that we're living in every period of history. But certainly it feels like it's really kind of, running up that curve, as society continues to kind of go in different directions. And every day, the news, the headlines, the things that are taking place, just, you can't make this stuff up. Stranger than fiction, right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, it seems that a lot of the conventional ways of understanding and looking at the world, hey Rana, is changing, or at least we're needing to equip ourselves with different tools in order to continue to understand the world around us. Certainly, in the world of work and knowledge, and I suppose knowledge work specifically, if we put those things together, many of us here in many ways are knowledge workers, or we have had a career in trading, understanding, buying, selling, working in knowledge, if you like. And so, knowledge and expertise, used to mean mastery, specialization, precision. But now we're in a world, and I suppose I have to drop in the two-letter word, AI, where information is just becoming instantaneous. It's becoming, immediately accessible. And so the ability to deliver knowledge in a certain format, in a certain way, is just, it's just not valuable in the way that it might have been 5-10 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago. So the speed of change is definitely a part of this as well. So are we in a new age? Are we in a new, different age where we're needing to completely reassess what we mean by these big concepts like wisdom, like specialty, like expertise, like the best in class? Or are we simply needing to just move the definition somewhere else? And this is what I wanted to have the discussion about. Is there a way where we need to rather be focusing on the value coming from not specific specialist skills, but rather a zooming out, the ability to kind of appreciate a situation at a larger kind of zoomed out level, where we're then calling on different types of skills, different kinds of capabilities to make sense of multiple forms of information, multiple forms of specialties, so that perhaps our curiosity or maybe even a sense of wisdom can be coming into the conversation. So, so that's what I wanted to frame up today, and I think it's really interesting because I think that in many ways, I think all of this is happening in different ways at different speeds, across different types of industries. Certainly, there's certain things where it's moving faster in different areas. There's also potentially some areas and some industries or some sectors where these things will take another 50 years to show their heads. Perhaps in the food industry, or how certain therapists or doctors have a certain type of knowledge or expertise where it's just really difficult to kind of either compete or have a machine to compete against. So it's interesting to sort of see this taking place at different levels. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of what's going through my mind is, are we at are we in kind of a Darwinian moment? Is this just part of what is our evolution? And if that is the case, how is that then going to shape, these factors? So if we are in this evolution, if it is, that we don't need specialists anymore, is it going to be, the person that evolves from that? Is it going to be the way we tell stories? That storytelling, that interpretation of that data. And then how do we link that together? How do we connect the dots? So that's what I'm kind of interested in, where that part goes. And then is it kind of a Darwinian moment?
I'm kind of coming at it from this, sorry.
Go for it.
John, the same I guess, area or ballpark. I think what's super interesting, if you look back thousands of years, authority and power has come from knowledge. And this is like fundamentally changing the paradigm. And so that in itself, the fact that this has happened, so relatively quickly, I think is just a real watershed moment in us as evolution, as us as human beings. John, I know you and I operate in this sort of coaching executive space, and I'm sure you feel the same, that sometimes the hardest thing when coaching senior executives is to help them realize that being the smartest person in the room is not, the mark of a great senior leader. And now we're sort of bringing that to huge swathes of society. And I think it's a really interesting moment for us to reflect on.
Yeah, so I suppose what is happening, and I mean, what you're saying is just prompting me to think, so who has the most power today would be the one controlling the narrative, not necessarily the smartest narrative, but I think that's probably the shift, isn't it?
Yeah. If we look at the current events, where narratives are being formed, it's the interpretation of it, and then where are they being strategically, placed? So the interpretation, distilling, and then where is it being placed, strategically, and then what's true, what's not true.
Yeah, and somebody actually, my partner in where was it, in Latvia, actually recently asked the question at a meeting, and I don't know, we were just chatting about stuff, and he said, what if knowledge is lost? So that specialist knowledge, right, which is probably all. Or a hell of a, so in terms of the human, there would probably be few people with huge specialized knowledge, because the mass obviously doesn't necessarily have that. And then let's say it's all wiped out because it's all online now. The knowledge is basically on. So let's say that disappears, which is probably, well, it's not probable, but I suppose it could happen if we look at lost civilizations, over history. So the Greeks actually worked out how to measure space thousands of years ago, and then they lost the knowledge for some reason. We don't really know why they lost the knowledge. Or, making concrete buildings, they actually had the chemical recipe to build these things that are still standing today. And then for periods of time, they actually lost that knowledge. Or the pyramids. So what if that happens to us? Maybe that's maybe it's not a Darwinian evolution, but maybe we're on the precipice of something else. I don't know. I'm just, throwing crazy ideas out there, but it is interesting to think
I think you
about.
said something very important, Leonie, which is kind of who controls the narrative, or what is the story that we're hearing about what's out there, which, as we've seen, as we continue to see, can often be totally divorced from what's really happening. There's multiple different realities of the future, and the perspectives or the narratives that we've been told about that. In fact, we can subscribe to different types of narratives and realities about the future at any time, right? You look at your YouTube or your Spotify playlist or something, we can choose which story to sort of tune into, and that then becomes what I see. And so it's interesting to see how that might be informing what we then talk about, or how we see the world through that lens. I suppose it's about the media in many ways, but in this sense, I picked up a statistic just looking at this, and the World Economic Forum reports that about 40% of core job skills will evolve by 2030. That's only 5 years away. So that means that nearly half of all of our kind of core skills are going to be totally different within the next 60 months, right? Now, what's interesting about that is that whether or not that becomes true, or maybe it is 70% of that, or perhaps it's a number lower than that, we then orientate ourselves, the real organizations and their hiring strategies, how they promote from within, how they advertise, how they work with clients, all kind of, responds to that, which is interesting. So you're right, we're so shaped by the story. We're so kind of reactive to what's going on out there. And I think the faster change happens, the more that kicks in.
Yeah. And I mean, I have one question in my head that says, so is AI making all of us smart, or is it making all of us dumb?
Yeah.
It's a great question, actually. You know, where would be a comparison with AI and other things? That's what I would be looking at, because I think it's very relevant. You know, if AI is going to take away our capability to, should we say, calculate in our head, you know, like the calculators, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, how many of us still calculate like we used to in our head, you know, going back 30 years? You know,
I mean, I already can't really do that. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I've got too much help.
yeah.
Okay, I mean, I wonder if it's a sort of the speed of change. Does AI allow us to fill the knowledge gaps to then sort of allow us to have a conversation with specialists? So you're actually empowering specialists to follow their curiosity, can't say that, follow their purpose, follow their specialism. And you can then, let's say like a practical example, I've got a issue with my brakes on the car. I can find out from a surface level, I can work out based on the age of the car, the mileage it's done, roughly what the problem could be. I can then go and have an informed conversation with someone who I trust, and that then empowers the relationship. They can give me the feedback. I build trust in the specialist, and actually, all it's done is sort of allowed me to practically engage with someone on a face-to-face basis. So I kind of see it from the other angle, is that it allows us to, I don't know, remove barriers potentially and get closer.
That's an important, thing that you said there, trust. Yeah, go for it, Rana.
To go back to the calculator analogy, we had this device that technically was replacing our needing to do these calculations in our head. Or when CAD software came out, I was a structural engineering student, and all of a sudden we went from having to do all the structural calculations on paper with pencil to now we have this software. And so I feel like it's just part of the evolution where we're given these tools that, yes, we can use them as a crutch and our knowledge can become in this stagnant place, or we can use it as a tool to do what we already know how to do more efficiently. If you're just depending on the software, there's no experience, there's no instinct, there's no human gut response about it. And I think that's really what we bring to the table. It's not that the tools will replace us. It's what can we create being complemented by these tools. And I totally agree with Ines that it allows a certain leveling of the playing field. And it is also availing a huge crutch to a lot of people who don't know how to use it in a way to be informative and then make their decisions.
I suppose why it becomes a challenge and in a way a debate, this discussion, or something that requires us to kind of interact on multiple levels, is because we don't know. We don't really know. It's possible that it could go in sort of different directions, but we are being asked to kind of change quite quickly and kind of adapt quite quickly, because often, we'll be hearing that something like AI will help us with productivity. We'll be able to get more done in less time or perhaps the same time. And whether or not that is overhyped or underhyped, we can debate that. But at the same time, the time that it is purportedly making time for in our diary, now I've got these 3 extra hours in the day I can do new things with. But that the nature of what I'm filling that time with is fundamentally different. It's not like I can add in more little tiny kind of mundane tasks to it, which means then yes, I could add more to it. The kind of the subtext, I think, of what is being said there is that in that time I'm going to be having to do completely new things that I've not been trained or adapted to do before, which is to think perhaps a whole lot more laterally about my role, or now I'm going to need to think really creatively and be really quite curious about how to fill that time. And so that's perhaps where it's difficult, because we're sort of managing different contexts, and that takes a little while. And I think an instinct in many ways to know how to manage. Anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab. I've been thinking quite a lot about this point, and as human beings, we crave simplicity and clarity and binary 1-0 answers oftentimes. And if you look into the world of strategic thinking, this in itself isn't new, but the accent on those strategic thinking skills, in my view, in a world where knowledge and facts are at our fingertips, becomes even more of a premium. So, can I look round the corners? So, can I anticipate? You mentioned this already, Alex, can I challenge my assumptions, my frames of reference? And that's really hard to do, particularly if they kind of attach to our core values. And then can I interpret, can I make sense of complex data? So I think these three skills, in my experience, are very hard for people to learn, not least because they require a measure of cognitive complexity. It isn't binary, right? There's trends and there's uncertainties, and disruption sort of is the underlying element to all of them. And I think instead of sort of being the preserve perhaps of more senior leaders, we all kind of need to develop these types of skills much, much earlier in our lives, because the massive information coming to us is so great. And so it then becomes a matter of parsing, challenging, testing, triangulating, and interpreting ever larger amounts of data. And I think that's a massive human challenge for us.
Yeah. Does anyone want to have a go at thinking about where wisdom comes from, or where wisdom perhaps fits into this? And maybe just to frame that up a little bit, when we think of someone who is wise, we think of maybe an elder sitting in a chair dispensing great questions and things for us to think about, and summing things up beautifully and simply in a couple of words. At the same time, though, wisdom is also a simple way of expressing a lot. And I think that a lot of the time when we're looking into the future, we're often trying to find easier ways of understanding complex things or problems in front of us, right? We're looking for whether it might be little hacks, maybe productivity sort of tricks, maybe it's a better way to think about the goals I'm trying to set in my life, or the way I'm trying to redirect my career. I'm looking for advice. I'm looking for perspective from someone, hopefully, who can help to, make it clear for me, or help me to recognize my own clarity. Where do you think that comes from, or is there a useful way to think about that?
For me there, Alex, I think wisdom, the interpretation of it is going to change. I think, as you said there, wisdom is about giving answers, is sharing knowledge. I think what's going to happen is with wisdom is the reinterpretation. It's going to be the kind of questions that we ask from wisdom about the possibilities, what that will open. So I think interpretation there from wisdom will go more that direction. There'll be the quality of the question asked to the broader mass, rather than giving the answers to the broader mass.
The quality of the question instead of the answer.
Yeah, but using the wisdom, the knowledge to ask the quality of the question.
I would second that.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think it's all about asking smart questions. I mean, a lot in life is about this, and I think it's just becoming more and more important.
Are there certain roles, perhaps it might be a role that some of you are inhabiting right now, perhaps it's friends or colleagues that you're seeing around you, where despite this kind of trend that we're talking about, where we're looking at a broadening out of expertise and more of a generalist look at things, are there certain areas where you think it will be still really highly sought after, less vulnerable to this kind of replacement, whether it's AI, whether it's through productivity, whether it's through, just different shapes of the markets, certain things where you see this will really be the last mile that gets touched, the kinds of skills or even roles that are still, for now, protected? And I wonder why.
I think we're going to see 80-20 first bridge before we get to that point. So when I'm coaching a lot of individuals these days, the biggest problem is they're being asked to be specialists, but in a much broader context. So they're being asked to do much more, but to retain a level of specialization. And I think the only way they're going to be able to go forward with that is to be able to focus in on what is their classic 20% that's going to drive, sort of their 80% of output. So I think we're going to see that curve first. That'd be what I would see.
Yeah, I mean, anything with industry, legislation, history, I don't know. I work in education. I don't see that as a rapid innovator or change agent. So I think you'll probably find with the 80-20, you'll have the flip way, the 20% trying to sort of maintain their structures, maintain their control as a kind of defense mechanism, just because it's sort of the structures that are in place, the jobs that are in place, the people it affects. And then you'll see innovation in sort of the cutting edge fields, whether it's sort of blockchain, I don't know, technical advancement, space, you name it. But in the sort of traditional industries, I think I'm seeing it is slow to change because they just can't adapt to it.
Yeah, I think I maybe have a bit more of a dystopia. I agree, Ennis, that there will be real resistance. And for me, what's interesting is how much resistance and how is that going to show up? Because it's one thing if you're, hollowing out early career roles of younger people who perhaps don't have the power, authority, or control or monetary control that people who are further on in their career. But those people that have deep, deep, deep levels of expertise built up over many, many years are at huge risk. I don't really see, I was desperately, Alex, trying to think about, okay, so what, where are we going to, see as a protected moat? I don't necessarily see it, except for what Ennis was saying, this defensive resistance, and is it sort of revolution, and or the people that are able to work on the human computer interface most effectively along with their expertise then become the winners, I think, in this story.
I think what's interesting about this as well is what it says about the speed and the nature of learning. Because as skills change and the marketplace that requires them change, the speed of adapting, but also just skilling yourself in the first place, I think also becomes an important barrier, but also an opportunity as well to be able to kind of factor that in. So, and it also calls into question the idea, like, well, is learning faster always better, or is it just louder? Is there something about the ability to learn and almost apprentice yourself to something over a longer period of time, something that ensures that moat that we're talking about, something that makes sure that, yes, you are a specialist, and that is something that makes you a little more sought after, a little bit more untouched for a longer period of time, because through learning and through absorbing knowledge over a longer period of time comes experience, comes judgment, right? And these are the kinds of human skills and the capabilities that we're hearing so much of, as where that next human edge is going to be. It's in the curiosity, it's in the experience, it's in the wisdom. But at the same time, that takes a long time to cultivate. But we're being asked to adapt and learn now, quickly, as fast as possible. So it's an interesting tension, isn't it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've always, from experience, and I think you guys, Sarah, John, etc., you've got probably better scientific base for this to explain it. But I always found that people generally who take a little bit longer to learn seem to go further. Like they really get it. They ask all the questions, the how, the why, the what, and seem to really in the longer term be, almost better at the same job than those people with very high RAM, as I call it, who are like very quick. They just, seem to get things quickly. They can, just retain it and understand it very quickly, but then tend to be a little bit more peripheral, rather than like having that deep understanding of being able to then teach it again or really go deeper. And this is just a personal observation, from dealing with people. Like I said, I don't have any scientific base for what I'm saying, so I might be wrong. But it's interesting.
It speaks of a learning pyramid, where at the very base of that learning period is just the memorization of fact. It's just factual knowledge. And then you take it to another level, and that's a place of understanding where you can actually, you're not just regurgitating, but you're paraphrasing. You're kind of able to understand it, to share it in your own way. And then as you go further up, you're able to analyze that, and then you go to that synthesis. Well, if you start off wanting to learn from that deep level, you're jumping right up the pyramid to that level of conceptual understanding instead of just this procedural, very algorithmic process where you're integrating it. You're in that neuroplastic space. And so, once you know it, it's not about memorizing it. You now know it. Mm-hmm. And so it allows those of us who tend to navigate a little longer solution paths, we tend to get to pull from all of those spaces instead of people that have this very massive, as you said, RAM, where they can just pull these bits of facts and spit them out right away. It hasn't really taken root and kind of synthesized from this place of dissonance into expanding that cognitive structure for it. So, yes, It is very scientific based.
Mm. So are we then saying that the question is then answered? We're all becoming more stupid rather than more clever, based on what you're telling me?
I've just got the question of the speed in my mind here. Yeah. Alex, you were saying about the speed of change. Yeah. And then coming back to what's being said here about, how we, in effect, can learn. Yeah. I mean, there's an interesting statistic came out last week for me when I did that introvert training, that 30 to 50% of the workforce is introvert by nature. So they learn differently. Yeah. So they take in information in a completely different way. So that question then for me is then, so are we exempting, like 50% from the possible workforce, just to say with the speed of this other 50% are going to be are going to win. I think that's an interesting area for me. Can they keep up?
Yeah. And I think it also underscores, just as an extension of what we've all said, the difference between almost like just putting facts together, whacking numbers and data together, almost like computation, and learning and understanding rather, and that's perhaps what is being presented to us as an opportunity to rise above just the idea of specialist skills, but more of a generalist view, because when we can understand something deeply enough, normally it comes with the ability to articulate that level of understanding clearly at a surface level, at the level that still takes into consideration what's going on at a deeper level and how the system really works and how it all clicks together. But being able to, just like Einstein said, right? If you can understand it properly, that means you're able to explain it simply enough, right? Or perhaps it's the other way around. Anyway, something like that. Albert knew what he said. But it's about being able to kind of, understand it deeply so that you can communicate it simply. And that's perhaps where really that kind of generalist wisdom shows its sort of best side, right? Because it can kind of cut through the noise with something that is understood and does have the experience, but rather not only have the viewpoint of one area, one level.
I think that gets into curiosity there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because curiosity is all about testing the assumptions. I think that's, sort of like an area for me, which I find interesting. Yeah. So do we allow for that curiosity, to take place? Because if we don't, then we don't have challenging of assumptions.
Yeah. Sarah's got this lovely expression called assumption bowling. Sarah, could you quickly give us a definition for that? I love that when I heard it from you.
It's from my friend. I can't claim it as my own. It's from my friend Rob Yander Young, who's a scenario planning and strategic thinking expert. And so think about an assumption that you have about a given situation. So an assumption, for example, I believe I can sell directly to Fortune 100 companies in the US. That could be an assumption about my business. And you kind of line up your assumptions. So name your 5 most closely held assumptions to this idea or thing that you're trying to achieve. And then you mentally sort of bowl them over by saying, what would I think if this wasn't true? So what if I can't sell to Fortune 100 companies directly? What do I then think? And it's a great way of kind of just expanding a little bit because often our assumptions are the things that we find hardest. Our personal assumptions are the things we find hardest to lose. And it's a helpful little technique.
Well, that's often because assumptions are useful, right? They help us to construct a shorthand version of reality around us. They allow us to survive. They allow us to make decisions. Otherwise, we'd be, caught in an existential crisis every time I'm in the milk aisle in the supermarket, right? So, but then they also trip us up in that way, and they help us to, or they get in the way. Yeah, exactly.
And if to Lainey's point around the folks that like to move at pace, it feels kind of slow and boring, right? Because there's more cognitive load essentially required to challenge one's assumptions in that regard. And so I think that this pace thing shows up in a lot of different dimensions in this conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
But curiosity, I think, is a fascinating point, John. And I kind of seeing it coming in a couple of different places in my world. I think great leaders, I think, have always had great curiosity and known, what are the great questions that they need to ask of their teams. But I think even more so now in the world of education, teachers that stand at the front of the room and say, this is the answer, a toast in front of a younger generation. It smacks, I think I heard a term recently, called performative expertise, when you sort of pretend that you know the answer, even though maybe 80% of it, and then some bright spark at the back of your classroom picks up their phone and says, oh, Sarah, I think you'll find, and so what we see, I think in our kind of evolution space of teachers who can use curiosity from the get-go to make it a co-learning experience, as opposed to this, I am the expert, you are the learners type of construct, which, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, has been in place for thousands and thousands of years. I think there's a lot of folks who are struggling to make that shift because they associate expertise with authority and power. And those two things are kind of now a little bit in the ether.
Yeah, in university, we would say it's that transition from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. Mm-hmm. And as an educator, as someone who's sharing this knowledge, this wisdom, being the guide on the side is so much more enriching and empowering instead of this self-reaffirming, I am the wizened one. But yeah, the guide on the side, it is a challenging space to hold if you only know that space of standing in front of the classroom, espousing your mastery of all.
Yeah, Rana, I think I would agree. I think it's very rewarding for some and absolutely terrifying for others. I remember,
Yes.
working with university professors who've never worked in industry, put them in front of leaders, and moving off script, really scary. It's sort of that, lawyer, don't ask a question you don't know the answer to type thing, which is completely out of the window in this new world.
Yeah, no, it takes a lot of courage along with that curiosity to really not let go of the reins, but definitely loosen your hold on the reins as to what does learning look like, instead of me just shoving this knowledge down your throat and students passively receiving it. It's like that's not good enough. And it shouldn't be, honestly. We've had that style for how many millennia at this point? And it's like there's a way to change it. So while yes, it is scary and it requires stepping out of those comfort zones on both sides, as a student and as the educator. But what's outside of those boundaries, while super scary, is that space for expansion and evolution. And it's, wow, I didn't know we could actually be so much more effective doing this thing that I didn't know.
Maybe as a final little thing that we could all go around on, to kind of close off our conversation, I want you to think about perhaps right now in your particular role that you're in. Some of you are career professionals, some of you are starting your own ventures, some of you have had your own business for a while. And I'd be really curious to see at the moment with what you're doing, your skills, with the projects in front of you, do you feel like you are moving closer in the sort of the spectrum, let's say, whether that's the skills, the capabilities, the viewpoints, are you moving closer to becoming a specialist in your field or in your space? Or are you finding yourself moving closer to needing to become a generalist in what you're doing? So maybe take a couple seconds to think about that now, where you are, because I think it's an interesting one, because I can think of a couple of occasions in my own career where I've kind of been on both sides of the spectrum at different times, depending on what's needed and where I was personally and what I needed to do or to learn in order to, meet the challenge. I'd love to hear from each of you when you're ready. Are you moving towards becoming more or being more of a specialist right now, or are you actually going towards the generalist persuasion?
Specialist.
Yeah, say more.
Basically, what I'm seeing with AI, it takes the frustration out of everything, and it allows you to move into areas which you couldn't have moved into before. Yeah. So it's like having a voice when you didn't have a voice. Yeah. So it gives you access to a pathway that you wouldn't have had. So once, for myself, once I've realized the direction I'm going in, now to actually get to that destination, it's just allowing me to speed up. It's allowing me to find the knowledge, allowing me to absorb the knowledge, and it's allowing me to then present it in my way. So it's definitely making me a specialist. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. So that means you're becoming more of a specialist, or would you say you're sought after as a specialist in your particular field, and you're moving your own learning in that direction?
I would put it a different way. I'm moving from being ordinary to aspiring to be extraordinary.
Hey,
that's where it's taken me.
I like that.
It's sort of following from what I took from that, John, is it's allowing you to be a generalist in the field, but you're a specialist in where your interest, your curiosity leads you. And as a result, you're becoming even more specialist and superhuman, because it combines all the powers of curiosity, the wisdom you're getting, and your purpose.
Yeah. And it's taking the frustration out of that path. It's allowing me to go, okay, that's where I want to be. That's what I think I can be. Now, how do I get there? I can get that knowledge quickly, but then I have to still absorb that knowledge to be able then to, internalize it and bring it as me. And so definitely it's that frustration word is the big thing for me. Now that's out of the way. It's like, whoa, So yeah, I can go specialize in that area while maintaining that, ordinary there. I can be extraordinarily there. And I think without AI, I could not do that. If I'm being really, really honest, in a cost-effective way.
Yeah, I agree. Just to follow that is that sort of you can ask as many questions. It goes back to your point about asking the right questions. As Sarah mentioned, I'm a bit of a slow learner, and I like to ask lots of questions so I can understand it. So I can use your AI to ask questions that I can understand much quicker than traditional Google search or what have you, and then dumb it down even further. And then I can find I'm being a sort of a specialist generalist within my tech field per se, with having a sort of an overarching wisdom, and then just picking up the bits I need to do. And the speed I can do it is phenomenal.
That's awesome. Who's next?
Where I'm at, since we're starting a business, it's generalist. It helps on many occasions. But I always have that resistance to dive into the rabbit hole because the answers are available. So it's finding that balance of making sure there's enough of a specialist information, but not diving too deep because there's so many other areas that I'm also responsible for. Finding that sweet spot, I guess.
Yes.
I think of it not as a sort of a either or spectrum, but almost like a T. So I feel like my expertise is getting better because, and particularly in certain parts of my field related to AI, RAG structures, all that kind of techie stuff, I'm definitely a lot better from a specialist perspective. I think that the top of the T, however, I guess is in some ways is the generalist. I think of it more like system level thinking. And you and I, obviously, Alex, have been spending a lot of time in this space, so maybe I'm got the recency bias going on here. But this idea of being able to see much more easily the interconnectivity of different parts of a problem, I think, is making me feel more accomplished than I was last year, the year before. So that sort of combination of the vertical of the T being the expertise, but also the ability to see across on a broader. The top of my T is longer than it used to be, I think.
Yeah, you guys are really saying what I'm feeling in a much better way, I think, than I can say it. I think it's absolutely fascinating to think that we're all different people in different parts of the world, sitting in this virtual room, and we're actually experiencing such a similar scenario. I mean, Ines, I think you really reflected what I was thinking, in that, I've always found it I think my natural personality is a little bit more of a specialist. I almost think like maybe a natural introvert is always tending to be a little bit more specialist, because you sort of like, going deep into things and thinking and asking the whys and the whats. And definitely I'm a slow learner. I always thought of myself as a little bit of a slow learner, but it's opening up, and at the same time I also find it difficult to focus. Like, I've always got so many things going on in my brain, and I think like, no, you can't do all of it. You just need to try and focus on one thing. And this whole AI thing is you thinking that your path is becoming broader. You find yourself that you can focus, and you've got this scenario that where you want to go, and yet that is it that systems thinking, Sarah, that I know Jonathan the cherry flavor dude, he also talks about that, strategy versus systems thinking. And I mean, that just hits home to me all the time, because we all hear people talking about strategy, and you think like, strategy, there's so little in life that's actually about strategy. Really, if you think about it, but we all want to be strategists. It really is that systems thinking. So I think it's broadening your path to say, well, actually, I want to go here, but all the things that I need to take me there, I can actually now investigate that and become a little bit smarter at understanding, this path. So it's fascinating for me to have just heard all of you say almost something similar or exactly the same in different words. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's really inspiring as well. I mean, firstly, I just get such a kick out of these conversations and bringing people together in community, in conversation on the kinds of topics that I think matter. But at the same time, it feels like it isn't so much about a question between like, specialist, generalist, like what, or either or, but rather that you're a kaleidoscope. And in a kaleidoscope, right, no matter, how you might twist it or turn it, some days you're going to focus right on into as far as you can in the domain knowledge, in the specific facts or the exposure you've had and the experience that you can be able to draw on. And then other days you're going to need to be able to manage 5 different pots on the boil. And that's what it is. And perhaps the real wisdom that comes from that is the knowing when to be able to wear those different hats when the challenge or the time comes, rather than like, I'm always a generalist, I'm always a specialist, and that's it, because that's just not how life works. That's just not how, the day-to-day works. And so it's so interesting to kind of, in a way, turn the topic that we had here in a way on its head, because it's not so much that it's like, it's the end of that, but rather it's a more useful framing. It's a more useful lens through which to see the fact that, depending on the challenge in front of us, you can be both the general and the president. You can be the president sitting up there seeing the overall kind of picture of the, of what needs to happen and understanding the bigger macro forces, and then the general on the battlefield who's going surgically and attacking and jumping straight into what needs to happen. So it's kind of refreshing, and also it makes sense, right?
I'd like to give you a shout out, Alex, because I think as I was sitting down to prepare for our conversation today, these themes that you have built community around, whether it's trust, whether it's curiosity, these types of conversations are so relevant within what we've been talking about today. So hats off to you for bringing these pillars. I think that they're really helpful to us. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's how I learn. So you guys are here for my benefit. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, wonderful.
You're just putting the strings, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
No, thank you very much, all of you. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice to see you.
Have a great
Let's do
rest
this
of the day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
See you.
Nice one.
Bye
Thank
now.
you, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Have a good week.
Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.